The plastic tray slipped. It was a small thing, a stupid thing, a tremor in her hand that she had learned to cultivate, a subtle awkwardness she wore like a second skin over her uniform. The clatter of a stainless steel kidney dish and a half-dozen sterile gauze packets hitting the linoleum was louder than a gunshot in the relative quiet of the ER hallway. A chorus of sighs. One of them was hers, a practiced, breathy sound of apology. "Honestly, Vance, can you do anything without making a mess?" Dr. Eris Thorne didn't even look up from his chart. His voice was a scalpel, sharp and cold, designed to cut. It found its mark. It always did. "Sorry, Dr. Thorne, my apologies." Elara Vance kept her eyes down, her shoulders hunched. A posture of submission. Old habit. No, not old habit. New discipline. A carefully constructed cage of incompetence. She knelt, her movements deliberately clumsy, gathering the scattered supplies. Her oversized scrubs, a size too large, billowed around her small frame, hiding the taut lines of muscle underneath. Hiding everything. Her hair, a nondescript brown, was pulled back in a messy bun that was perpetually escaping its tie. It was part of the character. Ellie Vance, the nervous, slightly useless nurse who somehow scraped through her certification. The one everyone gave the scut work to. The one nobody ever looked at twice. It was a perfect camouflage. As she picked up the last gauze packet, her fingers brushed against the sleeve of her left arm. Underneath the thin cotton, a ridge of scarred tissue pulled tight. It was an old wound, a tangled, ugly thing that snaked from her wrist to her mid-forearm. Sometimes, in moments of high stress, real stress, not this manufactured theater, it would feel cold. A ghost of old pain. A reminder. She stood, clutching the rescued supplies to her chest like a shield. I'll get these restocked." Thorne finally looked at her, his eyes the color of a winter sky. They swept over her with dismissive appraisal. "Just try not to trip over your own feet on the way, Vance. We have actual work to do here." The humiliation was a familiar cloak. She pulled it on, letting the sting of it show in her downcast eyes. She had to let it show. It was part of the performance. Not because it hurt her pride. That had been scoured away years ago by fire and loss, but because their belief in her weakness was her greatest strength. It was her armor. She scurried away towards the supply closet, her steps intentionally uncertain. Inside her head, a different voice spoke, a voice forged in discipline and honed by impossible odds. Threat assessment, minimal. Ego-driven verbal assault. Maintain cover. Posture, submissive. Heart rate, controlled. Respiration, shallow, mimicking anxiety. The performance is everything. She hated it. She hated the person she had to pretend to be, this fragile, trembling thing named Ellie. But Elara was dead. Killed in action on a sun-baked ridge halfway across the world. Her file was a ghost, a collection of redacted pages and a single final entry. Valkyrie was gone. Only the nurse remained. She spent 10 minutes in the supply closet, not because it took that long to replace the items, but because the protocol demanded it. After a public dressing down, the character of Ellie Vance would need to hide, to collect her frayed nerves. So Elara stood in the silent, antiseptic-smelling dark and practiced control. She breathed in for 4 counts, held for 4, exhaled for 6. A simple cadence to settle a phantom tremor. She could hear the ER through the door. The rhythmic beep of monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on tile, the clipped, professional voices. It was a controlled chaos, a world she had chosen because it was the closest she could get to her old one while still being a universe away. Here, the enemy was biology, a virus, an injury, a failing heart, tangible, understandable foes. Most of the time. When she emerged, Maya, one of the senior nurses, gave her a sympathetic look. Maya was in her 50s, with kind eyes that saw a little too much. "Don't let him get to you, honey," Maya said, her voice a low murmur as she restocked a crash cart. "His bark is worse than his bite." Elara gave a weak, grateful smile. "He's just very precise." "He's an arrogant ass," Maya corrected gently. "A brilliant one, but an ass all the same." "You're doing fine. You're new. It takes time." Ilara nodded, her gaze skittering away. She couldn't meet Maya's knowing eyes for too long. Maya was the one person who seemed to sense something off about her act. She'd once seen Ilara catch a falling vial of medication with a speed and reflexive grace that was utterly at odds with her clumsy persona. Ilara had covered it with a gasp and a fumbled catch, but the look in Maya's eyes had been sharp. Perceptive. Details. Always the details. The overhead speakers crackled to life, the electronic voice sharp with urgency. "Trauma team to Bay 4, ETA 2 minutes, pediatric GSW, unresponsive." The atmosphere in the ER shifted instantly. The low hum of activity sharpened into a high-frequency buzz. People moved, fast. Gunshot wound. Pediatric. A child. Ilara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This was different. This was not a biological failure. This was violence. Thorne was already in motion, his arrogance replaced by a focused intensity that was, she had to admit, impressive. He was a master of his domain. "Let's go, people. I want a full trauma panel, O-neg on standby, and a pediatric surgeon paged, now. Vance, stay out of the way. You can stock gloves." It was a dismissal, an order to be useless. She nodded meekly. Acknowledge and comply. Maintain non-essential status. Observe. The automatic doors hissed open, and the paramedics rushed in, a whirlwind of blue uniforms and desperate energy. On the gurney between them was a small form, terrifyingly still. A boy no older than 10. His face was pale, waxy. A bloody pressure dressing was taped to his chest. Multiple GSWs, torso and abdomen. Lost vitals twice in the rig, managed to get him back with epi. He's circling the drain. They transferred him to the trauma bed. The team descended like a pack, a flurry of hands and voices calling out numbers, readings, requests. "No pulse, starting compressions. Push 1 of epi. He's in V-fib, paddles, charge to 50. Ilara stood by the glove dispenser, her hands flat against the wall. She was outside the circle of frantic activity, an observer, just as she'd been ordered. But her eyes weren't the meek, unfocused eyes of Ellie Vance. They were scanning, assessing. The entry wound on the chest was high, near the clavicle. But the paramedic had mentioned the torso. The angle was wrong. The blood loss was too rapid for the visible damage. Her mind was a targeting system, processing data points the chaos obscured from others. The compressions weren't working. The defibrillator shocked the small body, making it arch unnaturally. Nothing. A flat line screened from the monitor. "Still asystole. Another round of epi." Thorne's voice was strained, losing its crisp edge. "Where the hell is that surgeon? We're losing him." They were. She could see it. They were treating the symptoms, but they were missing the cause. Her gaze fixed on the boy's neck, the slight distension of his jugular vein. She saw the faint bruising under his sternum, a subtle discoloration almost lost against his pale skin. Tension pneumothorax was the obvious diagnosis, but they would have caught that. The chest tube would be in already. This was something else. The high entry wound, the rapid decompensation, the distended veins. Cardiac tamponade. Blood filling the pericardial sac, squeezing the heart until it couldn't beat. A battlefield injury. Rare in a civilian ER. They were running out of time. The window was closing. Seconds, not minutes. "Damn it, call it!" Thorne's voice was heavy with defeat. The words hung in the air, a death sentence. The nurse doing compressions slowed, her face etched with despair. And something inside Ilara broke. It was the boy, the small, still form. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't part of the game. He was a child. The discipline, the carefully constructed cage, shattered into a million pieces. The years of hiding, of being a ghost, evaporated in a single, silent decision. She moved. It wasn't the shuffle of Ellie Vance. It was the swift, economical glide of an operator. She crossed the 10 feet to the trauma bed in 2 steps. "Move." The word was not a request. It was a command. It was low, guttural, and packed with an authority that no one in that room had ever heard from her. It cut through the din like a blade. The nurse on the chest instinctively stepped back. Dr. Thorne spun around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Vance, what in God's name do you think you're—" She didn't look at him. Her focus was absolute, narrowed to a single point. The boy, the mission. Her hands, the same hands that had trembled and dropped a tray minutes before, moved with breathtaking speed and precision. She didn't reach for the paddles or a syringe of epinephrine. She grabbed a large-bore 1.5 catheter from the tray, an 18-gauge, and a 20 cubic centimeter syringe. Standard equipment used for the wrong purpose. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. Thorne took a step forward. "Vance, I said stand down. That's an order." She ignored him. Her left hand palpated the boy's chest, finding the space just below the xiphoid process, the tip of the breastbone. Her fingers were sure, mapping the unseen anatomy beneath the skin. Target acquired. Her right hand drove the needle in, angled up at 45 degrees, aimed toward the left shoulder. It wasn't a tentative push. It was a single decisive practiced motion, a killing motion, repurposed to give life. A collective gasp filled the room. "My God, she's going for the heart," Maya breathed. Thorne froze, his face white. "She'll puncture the ventricle. Stop her!" But no one moved. They were all transfixed. They were watching something that didn't belong in their world. It was too fast, too certain. It was the brutal, efficient grace of the battlefield, brought into their sterile, ordered space. Ilara pulled back on the syringe's plunger. At first, nothing. Then, a dark, non-clotting stream of blood filled the plastic tube. Confirmation. She held the needle steady with one hand, her knuckles white, and drew back, aspirating the fluid. 10 cubic centimeters, 15, 20, the syringe filled. The pressure inside the boy's chest was releasing. On the monitor, the flat line wavered. A single, lonely spike appeared, then another. Beep, beep, beep. A slow, ragged sinus rhythm. Weak, but it was there. The boy's heart was beating again. She pulled the needle out in one smooth motion, dropped the bloody syringe onto the tray, and stepped back. The entire sequence had taken less than 15 seconds. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the fragile, rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor, a sound of impossibility. Every eye was on her. Thorne, the other nurses, the paramedics. They stared at her not as Ellie Vance, the clumsy subordinate, but as if she were a creature from another planet. Their faces were a mixture of awe, confusion, and a dawning, terrifying respect. Thorne was speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His authority, so absolute moments before, had been bypassed, rendered irrelevant. He, the great Dr. Eris Thorne, had been about to call time of death. And this mousy, incompetent nurse, had saved a life with a procedure he'd only ever read about in military medical journals. A subxiphoid pericardiocentesis, a blind, desperate gambit, performed with a terrifying, impossible confidence. Ilara stood there, the adrenaline of the moment leaving her. The mask was gone. She felt exposed, raw. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. She looked at her hands. They were steady, not a tremor. Cover compromised, tactical error, unacceptable. She took a shaky breath, forcing the persona back into place. The shoulders slumped, the eyes dropped to the floor. I'm sorry, she stammered, the words feeling like ash in her mouth. I read about it. I thought it was a pathetic attempt. No one was buying it, not anymore. The spell was broken by the arrival of the pediatric surgeon, who bustled in, ready for a thoracotomy. He stopped short, looking from the stable monitor to the stunned faces of the trauma team. What happened? I was told he was gone. Thorne finally found his voice, though it was hollow, thin. He was. Nurse Vance intervened. He said her name as if it were a foreign word. The surgeon glanced at the bloody syringe and the catheter on the tray, then at Ilara. His eyebrows shot up. With that? In the field? Before anyone could answer, a new sound intruded. The deep, percussive thump, thump, thump of a heavy helicopter, growing rapidly louder. It wasn't the familiar whine of the civilian medevac. This was a deeper, more menacing sound, military. Jackson, the ex-Marine security guard at the ER entrance, stiffened. He knew that sound. A UH-60 Blackhawk. It was landing on their helipad, a space reserved for critical civilian transfers. "What the hell is that?" someone asked. The boy was now stable enough for surgery. The team, still dazed, moved to prep him for transport to the OR. But the energy in the room had shifted again. The mystery of what Alara had done was being overshadowed by a new one. Jackson's voice crackled over the radio clipped to his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is ER security. Be advised, we have an unauthorized military bird on the roof. I see armed personnel disembarking. Repeat, armed personnel." The tension in the ER ratcheted up to an unbearable level. People stopped what they were doing, looking towards the elevators that connected to the roof. Thorne, still pale, turned to Alara. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by a bewildered intensity. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low. She didn't answer, she couldn't, she was listening to the sounds. The rhythmic beat of the chopper blades spinning down, the heavy, synchronized tread of combat boots on the roof. They moved like a unit. She knew that sound too, it was in her bones. The elevator chimed, the doors slid open. Two soldiers in full tactical gear, rifles held at a low ready, stepped out. They were professional, their eyes scanning the room, assessing every person as a potential threat. Behind them, a medical team in military fatigues pushed a gurney, and on the gurney, propped up and looking grim, was a man in his late 60s, a general's star gleaming on the collar of his uniform. He had a hastily applied field dressing on the side of his head. The lead soldier's voice was calm, clipped. "This is a military medical priority. We need the chief of emergency medicine, now." All eyes turned to Thorne. He seemed to shrink for a moment, then straightened his white coat, reasserting a sliver of his lost authority. "I'm Dr. Thorne, head of this department. What is this? What's his status?" "General Marcus Thorne," the soldier said. "Motorcade was involved in an IED simulation that went live. Shrapnel wound to the head, possible concussion, signs of disorientation. We need him secured and assessed immediately." Eris Thorne's face went slack with shock. "General, Thorne, my God, Father." The general on the gurney looked past the soldier, his gaze sweeping the room. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, but clouded with pain and confusion. They passed over the doctors, the nurses, the equipment. Then they stopped. They locked onto Alara. She was standing near the back, trying to fade into the background, trying to rebuild the walls around herself. But it was too late. The general's expression changed. The confusion cleared, replaced by a look of profound, earth-shattering disbelief. He raised a trembling hand, pointing directly at her. His voice was a raw, gravelly whisper, but it carried across the suddenly silent ER. "It can't be." He stared at her, his eyes boring into hers, seeing past the messy bun and the ill-fitting scrubs, seeing the ghost underneath. "Valkyrie?" The name dropped into the room like a grenade. It was a call sign, a myth from the Black Ops world, a name whispered by some, revered by others, and classified to almost everyone. The name of a legendary operator. The name of a woman who was supposed to be dead. Alara's blood ran cold. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Years of meticulous planning, of self-effacing silence, of living as a ghost, all of it undone. First by her own broken discipline, and now by this. A ghost from her past, naming her in a room full of witnesses. The soldier escorting the general stiffened, his eyes snapping to Alara. Dr. Thorne spun around, his face a canvas of utter bewilderment, staring at the nurse he had been tormenting for weeks. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. Every single person in the trauma bay was looking at her. The general's eyes did not leave hers. "Valkyrie, you're alive." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world breaking. The question started almost immediately. a low murmur that grew into a barrage. Valkyrie? What does that mean? Vance, what is he talking about? How do you know the general? The voices swirled around Alara, a vortex of sound. She felt cornered, exposed. The instinct to flee, to disappear, was overwhelming. She took a half step back, her eyes darting towards the exit like a spooked animal. She tried to speak, to deny it, to build the lie again. I don't know what you're talking about, she managed, her voice a weak imitation of Ellie Vance's nervous stammer. I've never seen him before. He must be confused. But the lie was transparent. The way she held herself, the flicker of something hard and ancient in her eyes, it betrayed her. The 15 seconds of impossible skill she had displayed minutes earlier had already planted the seed of doubt. The general's recognition was the confirmation. Dr. Thorne grabbed her arm. His touch was not harsh, but urgent. Don't lie to me, not now. Who are you? His proximity was an intrusion, a violation of her space. Her training screamed at her. Threat, proximity alert, neutralize. She fought the impulse down, her muscles twitching with the contained violence. The scar on her forearm burned under his grip. Let go of me, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. He did, recoiling as if he'd touched a live wire. He saw the shift in her eyes, the momentary flash of a predator. Meanwhile, the general was becoming more agitated. The brief moment of clarity had passed, and the concussion was taking over. He tried to sit up on the gurney. Aegis Command, this is Thorne. We are compromised. Valkyrie, report. I need a sit rep, he shouted, his voice echoing in the bay. He was reliving something, a battle, a memory. The military medics tried to hold him down. Sir, you need to stay calm. You're in a hospital. Negative. The perimeter is breached. Where is she? Where is Valkyrie? He thrashed, his strength surprising for a man his age. He knocked a tray of instruments to the floor with a crash. It was chaos. The hospital staff was frozen, unsure how to handle a delirious general. The military personnel were trying to be gentle with their commanding officer, but he was becoming a danger to himself and others. Sedate him, Eris Thorne ordered, snapping back into his role as a doctor. 10 of midazolam. A nurse rushed to draw up the medication, but the general was fighting, his arms flailing. It was too risky to get a needle into him. The Lara watched the scene, her mind a whirlwind. Her cover was blown. The past had reached out and dragged her back into the light. Hiding was no longer an option. Retreat was impossible. There was only the mission. And right now, the mission was the man on the gurney. She walked forward again, her steps measured and sure. The small crowd of medical staff and soldiers parted for her as if she were Moses parting the Red Sea. They sensed it, a change in the atmospheric pressure of the room. She stopped beside the gurney. The general was still shouting, his eyes wild. He didn't see her. He was lost in the fog of war. She didn't try to touch him. She didn't raise her voice. She leaned in close to his ear, her own voice dropping to a calm, clear, and coded frequency. Aegis Command, this is Valkyrie. I read you 5 by 5. Stand down, General. I repeat, stand down. Protocol 07 Bravo is in effect. You are secure. The words were nonsense to everyone else in the room. Aegis Command, 07 Bravo. It was a dead language, a secret tongue from a world of shadows. But it wasn't nonsense to him. General Marcus Thorne froze. His thrashing stopped instantly. The wildness in his eyes receded, replaced by a dawning comprehension. He turned his head slowly, his gaze finding hers. The fog was clearing. 07 Bravo, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The safe word. The mission was a compromise. The mission is over, sir, Alara said, her voice soft but firm. You're safe now. We're in a friendly facility. You need to let them help you. He stared at her for a long moment, the full weight of her presence, of her being alive, crashing down on him. A tear tracked down his weathered cheek. They told me you were gone, he breathed. We all thought you were gone. Reports were exaggerated, sir, she replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. It was a grim, tired thing. He nodded slowly, then sank back onto the gurney, the fight completely gone out of him. He looked at the nurse approaching with the sedative. "It's all right," he told his men. "She's in control now." He held out his arm for the IV. The second silence of the day fell upon the ER. This one was deeper, more profound than the first. If her saving the boy was a crack in her mask, this was the complete disintegration. She had calmed a delirious, combative general, not with medicine, but with a code, a key to his mind that only she possessed. She had revealed herself, irrevocably. She stepped back from the gurney as the team, now able to work, began assessing the general properly. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her. She turned and met the gaze of Dr. Eris Thorne. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions: shock, disbelief, humiliation, and something new, a sliver of fear. He was looking at her as if for the first time, and he was realizing that the woman he had belittled and dismissed was something far beyond his comprehension. Who?" he stammered, unable to form a coherent question. Jackson, the security guard, approached her slowly. His face, usually a stoic mask, was filled with awe. As an ex-Marine, he recognized the cadence of her speech, the quiet authority. He had seen it in his own commanding officers. "Ma'am," he said, the word coming out with an unbidden reverence. That was command presence. She gave him a tight, pained nod. The secret was out. The life she had so carefully built was a pile of ashes. Before anyone else could speak, the lead soldier from the general's escort stepped in front of her. He was a captain, his movements precise and controlled. "Ma'am, I apologize for the public nature of this, but given the general's reaction and your use of a classified operational code, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. We need to secure you." Securing her. It sounded like an arrest. Standard procedure. You are an unknown variable, a ghost on the board. But before she could respond, another figure entered the ER. A woman in a sharp, dark suit that seemed completely out of place among the scrubs and uniforms. She moved with a purpose that parted the crowd. Her eyes were chips of ice, and they were locked on Alara. "That won't be necessary, Captain," the woman said, her voice carrying an authority that made the soldier pause. She flashed an ID from her jacket pocket. The captain's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he read it. He took a step back, deferring to a higher power. The woman in the suit stopped in front of Alara. She was vaguely familiar, a face from the before times. A handler, an analyst, someone from the world of shadows. "Colonel Eva Rostova," the woman said, her voice low enough for only Alara to hear. "It's been a long time, Alara." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Rostova, her last handler, the one who had written her final report, the one who had officially declared Valkyrie KIA. "Colonel," Alara acknowledged, her voice flat. Rostova's gaze was intense. "We need to talk, in private. What you did here today, both with that boy and with the general, you've made things very complicated and very dangerous." Rostova led her to an empty consultation room, the small, windowless box feeling like an interrogation cell. The captain and his men stood guard outside, effectively placing the entire ER wing on lockdown. No one was getting in or out. Inside, the silence was heavy. Rostova didn't sit, she paced, a caged panther in a tailored suit. "You were declared dead, Alara. We attended your funeral, a closed casket, a flag folded and given to a non-existent next of kin. Your record was scrubbed clean. As far as the world is concerned, you never existed." "That was the point," Alara said, her voice raspy. She stood by the wall, her arms crossed, a defensive posture. The Ellie Vance persona was gone, but what was left was raw, frayed. "So what the hell are you doing playing Florence Nightingale in a public hospital?" Rostova demanded, her voice a sharp whip crack. "We gave you a clean slate, a new life, anonymity, and you choose this? The one place where your skills might accidentally bubble to the surface?" "I needed a purpose," Alara shot back, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I couldn't just disappear, not completely. Here, I could help people. I could fix things. It was quiet. It was supposed to be quiet. Quiet just went out the window, Rostova said grimly. She stopped pacing and faced Ilara directly. General Thorne's arrival here was not an accident. The simulation that went live? It was a targeted assassination attempt. Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was bigger than a blown cover. Why? Who wants him dead? Rostova leaned against the examination table. The general was on his way to a classified briefing at the Pentagon. He has evidence, proof of a rogue element within our own intelligence apparatus. A shadow group selling black ops intelligence to the highest bidder. They call themselves Scythe. The name hit Ilara like a physical blow. Scythe. She knew that name. The mission in the Zaberwan Range, Ilara whispered, the words tasting like poison. The one where I died. Rostova's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. Yes, your unit, Aegis, was closing in on them. Scythe got wind of it. They fed you bad intel, led your team into a kill box. They wanted to wipe Aegis off the board and send a message. You weren't supposed to survive. The memories came flooding back, unbidden. The heat, the dust, the screams of her men, the betrayal, the impossible odds, the pain of the shrapnel that had carved the scar into her arm. She had gotten 3 of her team out, but the rest... The scar on her forearm began to ache with a phantom cold. So Thorne is a threat to them, Ilara pieced together, her mind shifting back into analytical mode. The personal pain was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. His evidence could expose them completely. Exactly, Rostova confirmed. The attempt on his motorcade failed. He's alive, and he's here. Which means this hospital is no longer a hospital. Ilara's eyes went wide with understanding. It's a battlefield. And you, Ilara, are standing right in the middle of it, Rostova said, her voice grave. They know the general is here. And once they realize he's being treated at the same hospital where a ghost named Valkyrie just reappeared on the grid, they will not send a surgeon. They will send a kill team. Not just to eliminate the general, but to finish the job they started 5 years ago. To erase you for good. The small room suddenly felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. The quiet life Ilara had clawed for herself was not just over. It had become a liability, a trap. She had run from the war, and the war had followed her home. What's the asset? Ilara asked, her voice dropping into the clipped, professional tone of her former life. The shift was instantaneous. She was no longer Ilara Vance, the haunted survivor. She was Valkyrie, the operator. Rostova blinked, taken aback for a second by the sudden transformation. The asset is General Thorne. His knowledge is paramount. He needs to be kept alive at all costs. What's the threat vector? Scythe uses a mercenary outfit, deniable, professional, ruthless. They'll likely try to infiltrate the hospital, disguised as civilians or first responders. They'll cut communications and power to isolate the target zone. Standard operating procedure for a soft target insertion. Ilara's mind was already working, building a schematic of the hospital in her head. Entrances, exits, choke points, fields of fire. She had spent weeks walking these halls as a meek nurse, but she had been observing. Always observing. Old habit, old discipline. The ER is a kill box, Ilara stated flatly. Too many entrances, too much glass. We need to move the general, now. Where? Rostova asked. The surgical wing, Ilara decided instantly. It's on a higher floor, fewer access points. The operating rooms are fortified, designed to be sterile and sealed. We can control the corridors. Rostova nodded, pulling out a satellite phone. I have a QRF team from Fort Belvoir en route, but they're 30 minutes out, best case. We're on our own until then. 30 minutes is a lifetime, Ilara said grimly. We need to move now. They stepped out of the consultation room. The atmosphere in the ER was still tense, a mixture of fear and bewildered curiosity. Ilara ignored the stares. She walked directly to the general's gurney. He was sedated but conscious, his eyes tracking her. "General, we're moving you," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Then she turned to the stunned group of hospital staff. Her gaze swept over them, assessing. "Dr. Thorne," she barked. Eris flinched at the authority in her voice. "You're with me. You're the general's physician. You'll be his personal medic. Gather a portable monitor, a full drug kit, and anything you need to manage a head trauma bedside." Thorne, to his credit, didn't argue. He was so far out of his depth that all he could do was obey. He nodded numbly and began gathering supplies, his hands shaking slightly. For the first time, he was the one who looked unnerved. "Maya," Ilara said, her tone softening slightly as she addressed the older nurse. "Get all non-essential personnel and patients out of this wing. Move them to the west wing, as far from the ER as possible. Use the internal corridors. Tell them it's a bomb threat. Keep it calm, keep it quiet, but move." Maya stared at her for a second, then a look of steely resolve settled on her face. She nodded once. "I'm on it." Ilara's eyes found Jackson, the security guard. He was already standing straighter, his hand resting near the sidearm on his belt. "Jackson," she said, "what's your background?" "Marines, ma'am, 2nd Recon Battalion, 4 years." A flicker of grim satisfaction in Ilara's eyes. A recon Marine, better than she could have hoped for. "Good, you're with me. You and I are the primary defense element. What's your armament?" "Standard issue 9mm, 2 extra mags. We have 2 shotguns in the security office lockup." "Get the shotguns," Ilara ordered. "Meet us at the service elevator at the end of this hall. We're taking the general to the 5th floor surgical suites." Jackson didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." He was already moving. Ilara had just taken command of a civilian hospital's emergency response. She had deputized a doctor, a nurse, and a security guard into her impromptu squad. Rostova watched, a look of grim approval on her face. The Valkyrie was back. As they began to move the general's gurney, Eris Thorne hurried alongside, pushing the crash cart with the supplies. He looked at Ilara, his face a mask of confusion. "What is happening? Who are these people?" "The kind of people who don't leave witnesses, Doctor," Ilara said without looking at him. "Now focus. Your father's life depends on it." They reached the service elevator just as Jackson arrived, a pump-action shotgun held at a low ready, another slung over his shoulder. He handed the slung weapon to Ilara. The weight of it in her hands was familiar, comforting. It had been years, but the muscle memory was there. She racked the slide, the sh-ch sound echoing in the concrete elevator bay. It was a sound of finality, the last piece of Ellie Vance dying away. They crowded into the elevator, Ilara, Jackson, Rostova, Eris, and the general on his gurney. The doors slid shut, encasing them in a metal box. As the elevator began its ascent, the lights flickered. Then they went out completely. The elevator car plunged into absolute darkness, its emergency lights failing to kick in. The hum of the motor died, and the car shuddered to a halt between floors. "Power's out," Jackson stated the obvious, his voice tight. "They're here," Ilara said, her voice calm in the pitch black. "They've cut the main grid. They'll be coming up the stairwells." From the darkness, Eris Thorne's voice was a panicked whisper. "We're trapped." "No," Ilara replied, her voice a sliver of steel. "They are." In the suffocating darkness of the elevator, a small, powerful beam of light cut through the air. It came from a tactical penlight that Ilara had produced from her pocket, a tool she had carried every day for 5 years, a relic of her past life. She aimed the light at the control panel, then at the emergency hatch in the ceiling. "Jackson, give me a boost." Without a word, the Marine laced his hands together, creating a foothold. Ilara handed him the shotgun. "Cover the doors. They might try to pry them open." She used his hands as a springboard, launching herself upwards. Her fingers found the latch on the ceiling hatch. It was stiff, but she put her weight into it, her hidden strength surprising even herself. With a groan of metal, the hatch popped open, revealing the dark, greasy abyss of the elevator shaft. Okay, here's the plan, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the shaft. Rostova, you're first. I'll pull you up. Jackson, you and the doctor will stay with the general. We'll get the car moving from the machine room or pry the doors open on the next floor. Do not open these doors for anyone but me or the colonel. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Jackson said, his voice steady. Dr. Thorne, Alara said, her light finding his pale, terrified face. Keep your father stable. That's your only job. Can you do it? Eris swallowed hard, the sound loud in the enclosed space. He looked at his father, lying vulnerable on the gurney, then back at the silhouette of the woman in the hatchway. He nodded. Yes. Good. Alara hauled herself up into the shaft, her scrubs catching on the greasy cables. She lay on top of the elevator car and reached down, her hand finding Rostova's. With a grunt of effort, she pulled the intelligence officer up beside her. Machine room is on the roof, Rostova said, her breath misting in the cool air. We need to get to the 5th floor and secure the OR. Change of plan, Alara said, already scanning the shaft above them. They'll expect us to go up. We're going down. Down? Back towards the ER? They'll have teams sweeping upwards from the ground floor. They'll assume we're fortifying a high position. The basement is a better bet. Sub-level 2. It houses the old records, boiler rooms, a maze, defensible. Rostova considered it for a second. It's a risk. We'll be cornered. Everywhere is a corner in this building, Alara countered. But down there, we choose the engagement zone. We can bottleneck them in the service corridors. Rostova nodded. Your call, Valkyrie. It's your field. Alara climbed the emergency ladder on the shaft wall, the shotgun slung tight across her back. She moved with a fluid simian grace, her sneakers finding silent purchase on the metal rungs. At the 3rd floor landing, she used a multi-tool from another hidden pocket to work on the outer door lock. It took her 30 seconds. With a soft click, the doors unlocked. She and Rostova slipped out into the darkened hallway of the maternity ward. It was eerily silent. Maya's evacuation order had worked. The floor was deserted. Stay here, Alara whispered. I'll get the others. She rappelled down the elevator cables, her descent controlled and silent. She landed on the roof of the car with no more than a soft thud. It's me, she said, her voice low. We're on the 3rd floor. I'm going to pry the doors. Be ready to move, fast and quiet. Using the pry bar from her multi-tool, she forced the inner elevator doors open. Light from her pen light spilled into the car. Jackson had his pistol aimed at the opening, relaxing only when he saw her face. Let's go, she ordered. Doctor, you and I take the gurney. Jackson, you take rear guard. Rostova has our 6 in the hall. They manhandled the gurney out of the elevator and into the hallway. It was slow, awkward work in the dark. The general was a dead weight, the gurney's wheels catching on the floor. Too slow, Alara hissed. We have to leave the gurney. We can't carry him, Eris protested. He has a head injury. We don't have a choice, Alara looked at Jackson. Fireman's carry, you or me? I've got him, ma'am, Jackson said, already handing his pistol to Rostova and holstering his own. He bent down and with a grunt of effort, hoisted the unconscious general over his shoulders. It was a feat of pure strength. Move, Alara commanded. They abandoned the gurney and moved down the hallway, a strange procession in the dark. 2 women in tactical ready poses, one with a shotgun, the other with a pistol. A security guard carrying a general, and a doctor clutching a medical kit, completely out of his element. They found the stairwell. The air was cold, smelling of concrete and dust. Listen, Alara whispered, holding up a hand. From below, they could hear it. The faint but unmistakable sound of movement. The scuff of a boot, the soft click of gear. They're on the 2nd floor, sweeping up, she breathed. They're between us and the basement. We're cut off. Roof then, Rostova suggested. The QRF will be there. They'll expect that. They'll have a team covering the roof access, Alara countered. Her mind was racing, processing options, calculating risks. No, we do something they won't expect. We go right at them. Jackson shifted the general's weight on his shoulders. Through them? Around them, Alara corrected. This is a hospital. It's not built like a fortress. There are other ways. Dr. Thorne, you've worked here for years. Think. On the second floor, is there anything that connects the east and west wings besides the main corridors? Eris looked terrified, his mind blank with panic. I don't know. The main hallway, the staff corridor. Think. Alara's voice was a slap. Maintenance tunnels, chases, a skywalk. A skywalk, Eris said, his eyes widening. Yes, between the main hospital and the outpatient clinic. It's on the second floor. It's all glass. Perfect, Alara whispered, a grim smile on her face. They'll see it as a death trap. They won't be watching it closely. That's our route. We cross to the clinic, circle back, and get to the basement from the other side. They descended the stairs, their steps unnaturally silent. Alara took the lead, shotgun at the ready. She peered around the corner into the second-floor hallway. It was empty, but the sounds from the far end were closer now. They could hear muffled voices, speaking in a language she didn't recognize, Eastern European. She motioned for them to follow, her hand signals crisp and clear. Jackson, even carrying a full-grown man, moved with a soldier's discipline. They hugged the wall, using the shadows cast by the emergency exit signs. The skywalk was halfway down the hall, a glass and steel tube suspended 20 feet above the ambulance bay. In the dark, with the city lights twinkling outside, it felt like a bridge to nowhere. Rostova, you and I first, Alara whispered. Cover the far side. Jackson, as soon as we're across, you bring the general. Doctor, you're last. Move fast. Alara and Rostova slipped into the skywalk, their weapons scanning the opposite end. It was clear. Alara gave the signal. Jackson started across, his steps heavy but swift. The glass walls offered no cover, they were completely exposed. Halfway across, a spotlight erupted from the parking lot below, flooding the skywalk with brilliant white light. Contact, a voice yelled from below. They had been spotted. The first bullet struck the glass wall next to Alara's head, spiderwebbing the reinforced pane with a deafening crack. Go, go, go! Alara screamed, shoving Rostova forward. She turned, dropping to one knee, and brought the shotgun to her shoulder. She couldn't see the shooter, only the spotlight. She aimed just to the side of the light and fired. The roar of the shotgun was tremendous in the enclosed space, the recoil a familiar, solid punch. The blast shattered a section of the glass wall, sending shards raining down. The spotlight wavered and died. Another shot whizzed past her head. They had rifles. Her shotgun was a poor counter. Jackson was almost across, shielding the general with his own body. Eris was frozen in the middle of the skywalk, a deer in the headlights. Thorne, move! Alara yelled, firing another round towards the source of the muzzle flashes below. A bullet hit the steel frame near Eris's feet, sending sparks flying. The jolt was enough to break his paralysis. He scrambled the rest of the way across, diving into the cover of the clinic building just as Jackson deposited the general safely inside. Alara fired her last shell and sprinted, her head low. Glass crunched under her feet. She dove the last 5 feet, rolling into the relative safety of the hallway as more bullets stitched across the skywalk behind her. They know we're here, Jackson panted, reloading his pistol. That route to the basement is a no-go. They'll be coming up the clinic stairs now too, Rostova added, peering down the dark hallway. They were trapped on the second floor of the outpatient clinic, a building with even fewer defensive positions than the main hospital. No, Alara said, her mind working furiously. This is good. They've split their forces. They think we're cornered. She looked around the deserted waiting area. Chairs, tables, a large potted plant, and a reception desk. Jackson, the desk. Tip it over. We make a stand here. Funnel them down this hall. She turned to Eris, who was huddled over his father, checking his pulse. How is he? He's stable, Eris said, his voice trembling. But we can't stay here. We're sitting ducks. We're not staying, Alara said. We're buying time. She looked at the large plate glass windows that made up the front of the clinic. They overlooked a side street. Rostova, what's the ETA on that QRF? 20 minutes, maybe less, the colonel replied, checking her sat phone. I'm sending them our new position. Tell them to approach from the west via Salinger Street and to be ready for a hot extraction. Rostova relayed the message. Jackson had the heavy wooden reception desk on its side, creating a makeshift barricade. Footsteps on the stairs, at least 3 sets. They were coming. Ilera took a position behind one side of the desk, Jackson on the other. Wait for my signal, she whispered. Let them get close. 3 men in dark tactical gear appeared at the end of the hall, moving in a tight formation, rifles up. They saw the barricade and paused. One of them spoke into his radio. Ilera took a deep breath, the world narrowing to the short, dark hallway and the figures at the end of it. The scent of cordite and fear was in the air. It felt like home. Now, she breathed. She and Jackson opened fire simultaneously. The hallway erupted in a cacophony of shotgun blasts and pistol cracks. The mercenaries were caught by surprise by the volume of fire from just 2 defenders. One of them went down, clutching his leg. The other 2 scrambled for cover behind a pillar. They returned fire, their automatic rifles spitting bullets that tore chunks out of the wall and the wooden desk. Splinters flew past Ilera's face. She was down to her last few shotgun shells. Jackson was running low on pistol ammo. This was a battle of attrition they could not win. Thorn! Alara yelled over the gunfire. The defibrillator on that crash cart. Is it charged? Eris, crouched behind a row of chairs, looked at the abandoned crash cart nearby. The green light was on. Yes. Bring it here. Keep it low. Dodging a hail of bullets, Eris crawled to the cart and unplugged the defibrillator, dragging the heavy unit by its handle across the floor towards the barricade. What are you going to do? He gasped. Shock them? Something like that, Alara said grimly. She looked at the fire sprinkler on the ceiling, right above the spot where the mercenaries were taking cover. An idea, desperate and insane, formed in her mind. Jackson, give me covering fire. Aim high. Jackson popped up and fired his last few rounds, forcing the mercenaries to keep their heads down. Alara grabbed the defibrillator paddles from Eris. Get back, she ordered him. She stood, fully exposing herself for a split second, and hurled one of the heavy paddles like a discus at the sprinkler head on the ceiling. It was a 1 in a million shot. The metal paddle struck the fragile red bulb of the sprinkler. It shattered. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss, black, stagnant sprinkler water began to spray down, drenching the hallway and the 2 mercenaries hiding behind the pillar. They looked up, confused by the sudden shower. Now! Alara screamed at Eris. Eris, understanding her crazy plan, hit the charge button on the defibrillator, cranking it to its maximum setting, 360 joules. The machine emitted a high-pitched whine. Clear! He yelled out of habit. Alara took the remaining paddle, its coiled cable trailing back to the machine. The mercenaries, realizing what was happening, started to move. They were too late. Alara tossed the paddle into the center of the growing pool of water at their feet. Hit it, she yelled. Eris slammed his thumb down on the shock button. 360 joules of electricity surged through the cable into the paddle and instantly electrified the water-soaked floor. The 2 mercenaries convulsed, their bodies locking up as the massive electrical current coursed through them. Their rifles clattered to the floor. They collapsed, twitching, into the water, smoke rising from their wet tactical gear. The hallway fell silent again, the only sound the hiss of the sprinkler and the frantic beeping of the discharged defibrillator. Jackson stared, his mouth agape. Holy! Eris looked from the unconscious mercenaries to the defibrillator, then to Alara. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated awe. He was a man who had dedicated his life to the precise, ordered science of medicine. What he had just witnessed was something else entirely. It was brutal, improvised, and lethally brilliant. I've never, he stammered. In all my years, I have never seen anything like you." The praise was hollow. Ilara felt nothing. No vindication, no pride. Just the cold, hard calculus of survival. She grabbed the shotgun from the floor next to her, checking its chamber. Empty. She tossed it aside and picked up one of the fallen mercenaries' rifles. It felt balanced, deadly. An AR-15 platform, heavily modified. "They'll have heard that," Rostova said, her pistol still trained on the stairwell. "More will be coming." "Let them," Ilara said, checking the rifle's magazine. It was full. "Jackson, grab the other rifle. Doctor, stay with your father. We're not out of this yet." From the street below, they heard the screech of tires. Then the rhythmic, strobing flash of red and blue lights painted the walls. "Is that the QRF?" Jackson asked, hope in his voice as he armed himself with the second rifle. Ilara peered cautiously through a bullet hole in the window. It wasn't the military. It was local police. 2 squad cars, their officers taking cover behind their doors, guns drawn. "They're walking into a slaughter," she said. The mercenaries would have marksmen. They'd pick the cops off with ease. She raised the rifle, looking through the scope. She scanned the rooftops of the buildings across the street. There, a flicker of movement in a darkened window on the 3rd floor. A sniper's nest. "Rostova, I've got a sniper, east side building, 3rd floor, 2nd window from the left. He's got eyes on the local PD." Without waiting for a reply, she braced the rifle on the shattered window frame, took a breath, and let it out slow. The world narrowed to the circle of the scope. She found the window, saw the glint of the enemy's optics. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. Across the street, the dark window exploded outward as her round found its mark. The sniper was neutralized. The action had saved the officers below, but it had also given away her exact position. Bullets immediately peppered the wall around her, forcing her back. "We need to get out of here," she said. "They've got us pinned." "The QRF is 2 minutes out," Rostova reported, her voice tense. "They're coming in heavy." As if on cue, the sound of another helicopter filled the air. But this wasn't a Blackhawk. It was 2 of them. And they weren't landing. They were coming in low and fast. One of the helicopters swooped over the building and ropes dropped from its side. The QRF team was fast roping onto the roof. The other chopper circled, its side-mounted minigun spitting tracer fire at the remaining mercenary positions in the parking lot below. The sound was like tearing canvas, a terrifying, overwhelming roar. Reinforcements had arrived. The tide was turning. But Ilara knew it wasn't over. The leader of the mercenary team would still be in the building. They would make a final, desperate push for the general. "They're going to make a last play," she said to Jackson. "They know their window is closing. They'll be desperate." As if to prove her right, a heavy explosion rocked the floor below them. They had breached a wall, creating a new entry point. "They're coming from the west stairwell now too," Rostova yelled over the din. "We're about to be flanked." They were caught in a pincer. Ilara's mind raced. There was no escape, so they would have to hold. "Jackson, watch the east hall. Rostova, the stairs. Thorne, if anything happens to me, you get your father out. You understand? You run." She took her position, facing the west hall, the rifle snug in her shoulder. This was it, the last stand, the end of the line, just like the Zaberwan range. But this time, she wasn't alone. The mercenary leader appeared. He was big, clad in black, and moved with a predatory confidence. He wasn't flanked by a team, he was alone. That meant he was good, very good. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He raised his rifle. Ilara didn't fire. She held her ground. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Valkyrie," he said, his voice amplified by his comms unit, a Slavic accent thick in his words. "I was there, on the mountain. I saw you die." "You saw what you were meant to see," she replied, her voice cold as ice. "We were paid a bonus to confirm your death," he said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "My employer will be very pleased to know I can finish the job myself." He lunged forward, not firing, but closing the distance with incredible speed. He was transitioning to close-quarters combat. He wanted to do this by hand. Ilara met his charge. She swung her rifle like a club, but he deflected it easily, his own weapon smashing into her side. The pain was sharp, electric. She stumbled back, gasping. He was strong, faster than she expected. He kicked the rifle from her hands, sending it skittering across the floor. He drew a combat knife, the blade long and wickedly sharp. Ilara had no weapon, only her body, her training. She fell back into a defensive stance, her hands up. The years of pretending to be weak and clumsy were gone. This was her natural state, a weapon honed and perfected. He lunged, the knife a silver blur. She sidestepped, the blade missing her by an inch. She grabbed his wrist, twisting, using his momentum against him. She drove her knee into his side, hearing a satisfying crack. A rib. He grunted in pain, but didn't release the knife. He was a bear, powerful and relentless. He slammed his elbow into her face, and her head snapped back. The world exploded in a flash of white. She fell to the floor, dazed. He was on her in an instant, the knife raised for a final, killing blow. She saw the blade descending towards her throat. This is how it ends. Then, a new sound, a heavy thud. The mercenary's eyes went wide, a look of surprise on his face. He grunted, and the knife fell from his hand, clattering on the floor beside her head. He slumped sideways, revealing Eris Thorne standing behind him. The doctor was holding the heavy, now bloody defibrillator unit, which he had swung like a club into the back of the mercenary's head. Eris stood there, breathing heavily, his knuckles white on the handle of the medical device. He looked down at the unconscious man, then at Ilara, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and triumph. "No one," he panted, "touches my team." Ilara stared at him from the floor. Then a slow smile spread across her face, a real one. The sounds of combat died down. The QRF team had secured the building. It was over. In the aftermath, the outpatient clinic waiting room looked like a war zone. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. Soldiers in tactical gear were everywhere, securing prisoners, tending to the wounded. Ilara sat on the floor, her back against the overturned desk, the adrenaline finally leaving her. Every part of her body ached. Rostova was kneeling beside her, checking a nasty gash on her forehead. "You're a mess, Vance," the colonel said, her voice holding a grudging respect. "You should see the other guy," Ilara quipped weakly. Jackson was giving a report to the QRF commander, his voice crisp and professional, pointing out the positions of the neutralized hostiles. He had performed flawlessly. General Thorne was being attended to by a military medic, but his eyes were on Ilara. He was fully lucid now, the sedation wearing off. Eris Thorne approached them slowly. He had a small cut on his cheek, and his expensive suit was ruined, but he stood taller than Ilara had ever seen him. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment, he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then he cleared his throat. "Nurse Vance," "Ilara," he began, his voice formal. "What I allowed to happen, my conduct towards you, was inexcusable. I was arrogant. I was a fool. What you did today, for that boy, for my father, for all of us, I have no words, except thank you, and I am sorry." It was a full, unreserved apology, a moment of true atonement. Ilara just nodded. "We all did what we had to do, Doctor." Later, after the chaos had subsided and the hospital was being secured by the military, Ilara found herself in a clean, quiet room with General Thorne and Colonel Rostova. Eris stood quietly in the corner, a silent observer. The general sat in a chair, a blanket around his shoulders. He looked old, tired, but his eyes were sharp. "The intel I carry is safe, thanks to you, Valkyrie," he said, using her call sign with a reverence that made her uncomfortable. "You saved more than just my life today. You saved the integrity of our entire intelligence community." He then turned to his son. "Eris, the woman you knew as Ellie Vance is Captain Ilara Vance. She was the operational commander of Aegis Special Operations Group. The best I ever saw." He looked back at Ilara. On that last mission, her team was betrayed. They walked into an ambush that should have killed them all. She was severely wounded, but she managed to get 3 of her men to an extraction point while holding off an enemy force 10 times her size. Alone. We picked up her vitals monitor going flat and found her gear near a blast crater. We thought she was vaporized. We listed her as killed in action to protect the secrecy of the Aegis program and to honor her sacrifice. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. She was a hero. She is a hero. And we left her for dead. The story hung in the room, a testament to a life she had tried to bury. Hearing it said aloud felt strange, like listening to a eulogy for someone else. Eris stared at her, the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The skill, the command, the scars. It all made a terrible, awe-inspiring kind of sense. "Your cover is blown, obviously," Rostova said, breaking the silence. "The world you built is gone. So the question is, what now?" Ilara looked down at her hands. The fake tremor was gone, but a real one had taken its place. A tremor of exhaustion, of uncertainty. "I don't want to go back," she said softly. "To the killing, the shadows. I'm done with that life." "No one is asking you to," General Thorne said gently. "But a person with your skills, your experience, you can't just be a nurse. That's a waste. A disservice to those who could learn from you." Rostova stepped forward. "We're rebuilding the Aegis program, from the ground up. We need a new generation of operators, and they need a teacher. Someone who has been through the fire. Someone who knows what betrayal looks like. Someone who knows how to survive when everything goes wrong." She was offering her a new role, not a combatant, but an instructor, a mentor. "Lead instructor at the new Aegis training facility," Rostova clarified. "You'd be shaping the future of special operations, passing on your knowledge, your legend." Ilara looked up. Her eyes met Eris's for a moment. He gave her a small, encouraging nod. Then she looked at the general. She thought of the boy whose life she had saved. She thought of the brutal, efficient violence she had unleashed. She was a healer, and she was a warrior. For 5 years, she had tried to be one by killing the other. It hadn't worked. Maybe she didn't have to choose. She looked at the scar on her forearm, the ugly, tangled ridge of tissue that had been a source of pain and shame. For the first time, she saw it not as a reminder of her death, but as a reminder of her survival. A slow smile touched her lips. It was tired, but it was genuine. "When do I start?" 6 months later, on a windswept training ground in the Virginia countryside, Captain Ilara Vance stood before a group of 20 young, eager candidates. She wore tactical pants and a simple black t-shirt, the scar on her arm visible to all. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, practical braid. Her posture was perfect. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer a ghost. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable weight of command. "My name is Captain Vance. My call sign was Valkyrie. My job is to teach you how to survive. Your job is to listen. The first lesson is this: the most dangerous weapon in any room is the one nobody sees coming. Now, let's get to work." She was home.